There is no love in that dimension. There is no peace in that dimension. There is no fellowship with anybody in that dimension. There is no life. There's only death in that dimension. And it is hell. It is an empty, void place with hell bearing down on you every minute of the day and telling you what to do. And they would tell me crazy things to do. They once told me to kill one of my friends.
Welcome to the Mark Atwood Show, Adventures in a Cosmic Soup. It is the middle of January, but it feels like the middle of June. It's 10 years in one already, 2025. This is a massive year. And there are many, many subjects that all of us need to become more acquainted with. And the last 2 years, most of you will know that I've written 2 books. This one is called God Wins, Spiritual War Poetry, which is becoming truer by the day. And the other one is this, Weapons of Mass Protection, Practical Tools for Spiritual Warfare, which covers the subject with Abby Wynn, my co-author, on how to protect yourself from demonic entities, because it is my view that the whole world has been demonically possessed our entire lives. Fourth dimensional entities have been controlling the course of civilization for a very, very long time. And at the forefront of this epidemic, you might call it, infiltration, whatever you want to call it, is the diagnosed, I use that word deliberately, illness, in inverted commas, of schizophrenia. Now, I've had the pleasure of speaking to a man in America who I respect enormously twice already, Jerry Marzinsky, about this subject, because his route to this subject is fascinating. But also, Jerry is going to come on the show again today to talk deeper about this with another guest. So please welcome back Jerry Marzinsky, first of all. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, glad to be with you again.
Yeah, it's getting regular.
Good. I have more in my pocket. Yeah.
Well, it's a subject that's endless, really. And I personally think it's one of the most important subjects on earth because so few people actually understand it. So maybe you could give a brief synopsis of yourself again to people that might be watching this that haven't seen you at all before, and then we'll go into Judy's story, if that's all right with you.
Sure. I spent my entire career, close to 45 years, working in different psychiatric settings throughout the United States, and I've hit virtually every kind that the United States offers. I started out at one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet. It had about 10,000 mental patients in it at the time I arrived. That's where I first started studying the voices that schizophrenics hear, and found that what we were taught in graduate school and what psychiatry and Big Pharma were saying didn't fit what I was experiencing, what I was seeing, and what the schizophrenics themselves were telling me. So I worked in the psychology department of a large state prison, working with criminally insane patients for probably 18 years. And I had a group of schizophrenics around me all the time that agreed to tell me in real time what their voices were saying. So I really made some progress there as to what they were and how to interfere with them. Okay. I worked in mental health centers. I worked as a contractor. The last 10 years of my career I spent doing psych crisis and emergency rooms throughout Tucson. So I've been in virtually every setting. And virtually every setting I was studying or probing the voices. What are they? And they're not what psychiatry and Big Pharma are telling you. Like Mark told you, this is another dimension that is hitting these people. But unfortunately, the mental health system and the entire medical system was taken over in 1910 by the Rockefellers. who came up with something called the Flexner Report and made it law that all the universities in the U.S. had to teach pharmacological medicine. It had to be based around chemicals. Now, this was more for their profit than it was anybody else's. The result on the mental health system in the U.S. has been disastrous. Now, those drugs might work with physical ailments like antibiotics. I mean, you take an antibiotic, it cures it, but it doesn't work with psychological problems. The Western mental health system is a disastrous mess. It's a abject failure. None of those drugs that the pharmacology people are putting out cure anything. Yeah, and it all revolves around money. Antidepressant market in the U.S. is expected to hit $15.98 billion by 2023. That's not million, that's billion. Okay? Global antipsychotic sales are going to hit 14.5 billion and that by 2021 and expected to reach 15.5 billion by 2022. These drugs do not cure anything. All they do is tamp down symptoms. They are neurologically toxic. They do damage to your central nervous system. And mental patients who have been in our state hospitals, when they did autopsies on them, their brains were shrunk like walnuts. Okay? So not only did these drugs not cure anything, they're actually destroying your central nervous system very slowly. Now, they won't tell you that. They won't tell you all the different kinds of damage that these antipsychotic drugs do. They'll tell you the common ones that you're going to experience: blurred vision, dried mouth, sexual dysfunction, that kind of stuff. But the long-term effects, I've never seen a psychiatrist tell a patient about those. Right? So these drugs are toxic. They cause permanent neurological damage. Right? They're not curing anything. In the United States, about 50,000 people a year are killing themselves. Right? A great number of them are on antidepressant and antipsychotic drugs. Right? And that number is growing. About 100,000 people are diagnosed schizophrenic in the United States every year, and that number is growing. So we've got more psychiatrists, more psychologists, more psychiatric toxic drugs than we've ever had in the history of mankind, and we're getting sicker. There's more mental illness, there's more mass shootings, there's more stabbings and murders. There's more psychotic people roaming around on the streets because they've shut down all the state hospitals. Most of them end up in prison at a cost far higher than keeping them in a mental hospital. Okay? So here's the psychiatric mafia and big pharma. They don't know what causes schizophrenia, so they had to make something up. They started by blaming mothers. The mothers said, hey, what did we do? They couldn't find anything solid there. So they moved it to genetics. They said, oh, there's a genetic abnormality. But none of the geneticists could find anything. So they said, oh no, it's not just one gene, it's a whole cluster of genes. They're all mixed up and we can't find it yet, but we will. It's genetics. No, the geneticists, no, they're not finding any genetic markers. So they had to figure out something to make it look like they understood what they were treating. So they made up the biochemical imbalance theory. And when I got to the state hospital, one thing I saw that was very odd, that they were insisting that schizophrenia was caused by a biochemical imbalance of the brain, but they never took any baseline. They never did any test, any blood work, any EEGs, EKGs, no kind of objective test to determine what chemicals in the brain were out of balance or by how much. And the reason they didn't do that, because they don't have one. They never did. This was made up by Eli Lilly back when Prozac came out. I think it was in the 70s, just to have some explanation for what caused mental illness. And then Big Pharma picked up on it, psychiatry picked up on it, and then the universities began teaching it. They were being paid off by Big Pharma to do that. Right? There is no biochemical imbalance in the brain. Matter of fact, it's staunchly been disproven now, and they're still pushing it. You can go to their advertisements for antipsychotic drugs, and they say, oh, it's believed that, or we suspect that. They're still pushing on the biochemical imbalance, even though it's been disproven. It's all around money. You know? So the universities are still teaching that stuff. Right? Now, the last lie that they told you, they have no research on it whatsoever, is that the voices that schizophrenics hear are auditory hallucinations. Right? I've been studying them for 45, 50 years. They run fixed patterns, right? And there's 23 of them. If you go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com and then go to articles, you will see those patterns there. You can compare them. You can see them yourself. If you're working with schizophrenics, you print those patterns and you'll see them. Hallucinations don't run fixed patterns. You know, they're all over the place. They're random. So here again, you're being lied to by the Western mental health system, who say, we hereby proclaim that these voices are auditory hallucinations because we said so. They haven't done any research whatsoever on that matter. It's a lie. These voices are entities. They're negative, demonic entities. They are parasitic. They feed off of the person's negative emotional energy. They put thoughts into their minds, into their thought stream, which are consistently negative, derogatory, abusive, and they try to lower the person's frequency where they're producing negative emotional energy, and they feed off of this. You know, it's been called louche in other works, but that's what they feed off, and that's why they're consistently negative. Right? You talk to schizophrenics, you say, how do you feel after the voices attack? They will tell you they're drained, their energy's gone. You ask, well, where'd it go? Well, I don't know. Well, you tell them, well, you know, the voices have attacked you 10,000 times throughout the year. Each time they did, your energy was gone. Where do you think it went? Well, I don't know. You tell them, okay, if you stuck your hand in a fire 5,000 times and each time you were burnt, what's burning you? They have no trouble with the fire. Oh, yeah, it's the fire. Then you go, well, you know, your energy ran out 10,000 times after you were being hit by the voices. Well, where's it going? Very few of them will go, the voices took it? You know, it's like a discovery. They're being blocked from knowing that by the voices themselves. Okay? Mm-hmm. So these voices run very fixed patterns. Okay? And if the patient asks them who they are, the voices will say, we are you. They want them to believe that those thoughts that they're injecting in their heads belong to them and that they are them. The voices come from outside of the person. They don't come from inside. Nobody's ever found a thought in a brain. You know, the brain is like a radio receiver. It'll pick up the frequency that you're tuned to. So if you're damaged, if you're been sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, you're vibrating at a very low frequency for the most part. These things are attracted to low frequency. They will come like sharks smelling blood, and they'll start injecting negative thoughts into your mind to increase that negativity, to bring your emotional frequency down so they can feed on it. Now, one of the things that happens when people first start hearing voices, they become very confused. What are these things? You know, it sounds just like them. It's not like there's not like, we are the voices. No, it sounds like the thousands of voices that you hear in your head every day. The difference is the content. The content is negative. It's derogatory. It's self-destructive. It's abusive. It wants to isolate you. It's very negative stuff. Right? So one of the things the schizophrenic has to overcome is, what are those voices? Because if they believe they're them, then they will become them. They will become and start acting like the voices. Right? I have some poems here written by a psychotic killer who's on maximum security block in Colorado right now. He wrote them about his voices. Maybe at the end I can read them for you so you can see how much control they take. I mean, they took this guy completely over. He murdered 3 people and cut his girlfriend to pieces. Murdered her.
We did an interview with his mother.
Yes. I don't know if we got time to read his poems there then, though.
I think we did, yeah. If you guys watching this want to find the other videos I did with Jerry, go on to Rumble or to X or to themarkoutwardshow.com. Type in Jerry, you'll find those videos. They're very interesting.
Okay. So the schizophrenic has to understand that these voices are not them. They don't come from them if they have any chance of recovering at all. And that's not what psychiatry is telling them. Psychiatry is telling them your brain is broken. You've got a biochemical imbalance. You got to take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life. They're doing more damage in the long run than they're doing good. Those drugs only tamp down the symptoms of schizophrenia. They're major tranquilizers. They cure nothing. Neither do the antidepressants. Now, there is one program that does cure psychological problems, and that's the MACE energy method. Okay. Spoke briefly about that before. They don't want you to know about that. They're completely ignoring it. And I believe Mark says, don't try it until I try it. So,
I've tried it.
And what'd you think?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic in its simplicity, but it's fantastic. I've got the book as well in the other room. But while you were talking, I was thinking the sales pitch for the psychotic drugs is very similar to another sales pitch for a vaccine for a
Yes.
virus that's never been isolated, doesn't exist. It's amazing how they've been getting away with this for so long. I got a question for you, Jerry, because you say it's about money.
Yeah.
I don't think it is.
Well, it's
I
about,
think it's about them.
the same. It's about the same thing as the
It's
other.
about them. It's who paid for the Flexner report? It was the Rockefellers.
Yes.
With the Rothschilds. And what's the outcome? It's chaos. It's demons running the planet, and that's what we've been experiencing all this time. And I think it's more to do with that than the money's like a cover. It's a good story. People say, "Oh, it's just money." I don't think it's anything. The people that created these reports owned Big Pharma. They also owned, I say owned in the past tense, the printing presses, the central banks, the money supply. They could print as much money as they wanted. They have to have, I think, money. I think there's another level behind it, which is to do with the rising of the demonic empire, which is what they want. They've tried to do. And I think what's fascinating about your work is that you've been at the schizophrenic criminal end of this is the cutting edge. It's the deepest, darkest part of it, because most people have absolutely no idea about these voices in their heads because everybody's had them.
Yes. They hit everybody. Virtually every negative thought you have about yourself or anybody else is put there by them.
Yeah, which is why we have to focus so hard on being optimistic about the future, because we're creating it, and the demonic entities want to hold you down in that low frequency because It's a feeding frenzy down there, and that's all of us.
Yes.
That's why this show today may be about, on the surface, schizophrenia, which is only experienced by a small percentage of the population, but actually it's about all of us. This is the extreme end of it, which is why it's so important to talk about these things and get them out in the open. So that's a great introduction, Jerry. But you want to bring on a guest today called Judy, right?
Yeah, Judy. But before we leave, if you're interested, don't be taking those psychiatric drugs first. Go to causisminstitute.com. Find yourself a causism therapist. Try them first before you turn to these toxic drugs. There's a whole list of them there.
What was that website?
It's www.causism, CAUSISM institute.com.
Okay, I'll get the link off you and put that below the video.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can also find it on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Yeah. Please do that first before you start taking these toxic drugs. This MACE will cure you of most psychological problems. Drugs will only drug your brain.
There's jerrymarzinsky.com. You guys can go and find that and follow Jerry's work there, which is excellent and very important work. Okay, let's talk about today's subject then.
All right, I'd like to bring Judy on now. Judy carried on a horrendous battle with the voices that she struggled with, and she does a better job of depicting what it's like to be schizophrenic and be at the mercy of these things and not know what's happening to you. She finally figured it out, but was struggling with it. I mean, they almost killed her, I believe, a few times. But she does a better job of bringing you into what it's like to be schizophrenic than virtually anybody else I know. So I'd like to turn the show over to her right now, and Mark and I will be jumping in with questions every once in a while.
Okay, let's bring Judy in. Hi,
Hi.
Judy.
Hello.
How you doing?
Well, I'm good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, you want me to start at the very beginning or just to jump in, Jerry? Last time we jumped right into the schizophrenia, and that seemed to go really well.
Yeah, just give them a brief background of the psychological damage you suffered.
Yeah.
You don't need to go into a lot of detail, but usually there's massive physical, sexual, or emotive abuse that schizophrenics have suffered before the voices get them. The voices are like sharks in the ocean that smell blood. And when they sense somebody who's psychologically damaged, they start moving in.
Yeah. Well, and I think I was a perfect target for these entities because I grew up in a home that was very dysfunctional. I had an alcoholic mother, alcoholic father. My family disintegrated when I was 13. I would say, even then, the ideas that would come into my mind about that I was worth nothing. I was suicidal when I was 13. So even then, I think these entities were working on me, but I wasn't hearing voices, but I was thinking all kinds of negative things about myself. So, and I wasn't as a kid allowed to feel any strong emotion. And that produced in me a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. And that, I think that played a really large part in what came later, because it was it created a feeding ground for these entities because all that was already there. So my experience started when I was in college. I got involved doing a lot of LSD my freshman year of college. And that was kind of my go-to drug. And I smoked a lot of pot too. And during my freshman year, I had some real ups and downs. I slit my wrists because when I went to college, I went without really any skills for survival. I'd gotten nothing from my family in terms of how to build a life. And so every crack in my world was huge. It was huge, and it would devastate me. So I I did slit my wrist my freshman year. And then at the end of the year, doing all this LSD, I had one really major bad trip that was extremely frightening to me. So I stopped doing LSD, went home for the summer. But during that summer, I started having dissociative episodes where I wouldn't know where I was. And I was a waitress that summer. And I'd be carrying a tray out to a table and I would forget where I was. Suddenly everything would go blank. I couldn't hear anything. I could see, but I couldn't hear anything. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what I was doing. I completely lost all, I guess, cognitive abilities. And it would last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 seconds. And then I'd pop back into reality. And I didn't know what that was. I thought, oh, I did too much acid and it messed something up in my brain. But I got through the summer, I went back to school. And when I went back to school, there was a guy that I was very much in love with. And he decided to leave school. I was very, very, very needy. And he just didn't want anything to do with it. He left. And so I continued to smoke pot and to do a lot of drinking. And when he left, it was very devastating to me. And I decided to kill myself. So I took a bottle of Valium one day. And I was lying on my dorm bed waiting to die. And I had a very strong sense that I had better call somebody, because if I didn't, I was going to die and I was going to go to hell. And it scared me to death. So I called my roommate and they came and got me to the hospital. And I woke up in the hospital with tubes coming out of my mouth and I pulled them all out and I was angry and pissed off. But that threw me into the mental health system. And it was around that time, actually soon after that, and it's hard, this happened a long time ago, right around that time, I was lying in my bed in my dorm, smoking some pot, listening to some music, and I started sort of, I guess you would say, hallucinating. I would picture in my mind, and I pictured in my mind that there was this great door, this great, huge wooden door, like something you would see in a castle. It was huge, it was big, it was heavy. And it was beckoning me to come through the door. I could feel it calling to me. And I thought, well, cool. I'd done a lot of acid. I'd gone through doors. I'd gone through portals when I was doing acid. And I thought this would be fun. So I, in my mind, imagined opening that door, and I opened that door and I walked through. And when I walked through, the door slammed behind me and I couldn't get out. And I was locked behind that door. I was in another world. I was in another dimension mentally, and I was in another realm. And and when I went through that door, that's when the voices started. And they started talking to me and telling me that I was worthless and I was useless, and they would mock me.
That's
They would
common.
mock me all day. Look, and there were 4 of them. I named one Nancy. I don't remember what I named the other ones, but I named one Nancy. And they would mock me by talking to each other. And they'd say things, well, look at her. She is such a mess. And then another one would say, oh, don't pick on her. We all know she's just crazy. You can't pick on crazy people. And then the other one would pick, he'd start up, he or she, whatever, would start up, and they would argue over me, and they argued over my craziness, how crazy I was. And then they began to tell me about how my life basically was over. There was no hope for me. I was never coming back. And in the university, they sent me to the mental health center, and I was diagnosed. And then the university would send over, they had a counselor they'd send over, and she'd ask me how I was doing. And I'd say, well, I'm not here. I would tell people I'm not here. And they're like, well, where are you? I said, I don't know where it is that I am, but I'm not here. And I explained to Jerry before, Mark, it was like living in 2 parallel worlds. I was in the world with these entities, with them tormenting me, and they do torment you 24 hours a day. It is constant torment. The Bible says that fear hath torment. I can't explain to you the torment, because there's not a second that you're allowed to live in your own mind. There's not a second you're allowed to think your own thought. There's not a second that they aren't bearing down on you. And not only do they talk to you, but you can feel them. And if you've been in spiritual warfare, you know that feeling. It is ugly. It's dirty. It's oppressive. You feel like your head is being pressed down on. You feel like your body is being pressed down on, and you're caught, you're trapped, and you're in this prison, and you're in this world. And I began to describe it as this hole that I was in. I was in this hole. And to me, this hole felt like it was 250 feet deep and 6 feet wide, and there was nobody at the top. So I could scream, and there was nobody that was going to help me.
Are you spiritually protected? Are you wearing the armor of God? Are you prepared against the principalities of darkness that currently wreak havoc in our world? Spiritual warfare is a very real thing. Weapons of Mass Protection is the explosive and practical 5-star best-selling book from authors Abby Wynn and Mark Atwood, who both agree that humanity is in the midst of the biggest spiritual awakening in human history. If you feel like things ain't what they seem, if you feel you are under attack, get your weapons ready now. Weapons of Mass Protection. Practical tools for spiritual warfare. Out now.
I had something similar while I was working with the schizophrenics. It felt like I had walked through a door also. And I didn't know what the rules were. I didn't know what the dangers were. I was scared. And there was nobody I could talk to who understood other than schizophrenics.
Mm-hmm.
I could talk to them, but I couldn't talk to anybody in our world until I ran into Sherry some 10 years later. But it is a different world. I mean, it's a totally different world.
It is. Your mind goes to a whole different dimension, I think, and so you live in parallel worlds. So in your mind, you're in this other dimension with these entities, and they are tormenting you. And then in life, you're living in this other world where you're not really a participant, because they tell you you don't belong there. Nobody wants you. There's no future for you. You're going to die. And then they would suggest that I kill myself.
I had one fellow where the voices were talking to each other about how they were going to kill him. There was a constant conversation. Well, should we kill him this way, or should we have him run over, or a constant discussion about how they were going to kill him.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, I just I had a girlfriend, my first love, and years later, I found out she'd been committed to a mental hospital, and I called her there, and she said to me, I said, "What are you doing there?" You know, she's very, very bright, but I'm sure there was abuse back in her childhood, looking back on it. And she said, "This is hell, Mark." And I was like very glib about it. I was in my 20s, and I was like, "Well, it's, you know, it can be rough." And she said, "No, it's hell." And then she committed suicide in front of her mother, like 2 months later, at the age of 27. And I'm pretty sure, because she was brought up in a religious cult that was full of paedophilia around me, where I was brought up in England, which fortunately the size of the paedophile problem in the UK is being exposed at the moment, as we said before the show, by Elon Musk and the Labour Party, but it's endemic throughout the whole of society, all over the world actually, but Britain is a particularly bad place. And I think what you said there that really struck a chord is that you didn't have the tools to build a life. And that is, you know, do you get any sense that your parents were having similar problems because they were both alcoholics? Were they getting the same sort of thing, do you think? Or are they still around to talk to? Well, I don't know, but
My mother had a breakdown, ended up in a psych ward to dry out because there was no alcohol treatment at the time. And she never came home. But you know, it's interesting that you asked that, because when I would talk to her, she was so filled with guilt and shame and remorse for having left her kids with my dad, who was a neglectful father. He was never there. I could go to Philadelphia when I was 14 on the weekend with my boyfriend. He didn't even miss me. So she was devoured by shame and guilt. So I would think that, yeah, she experienced this on some level, but she never called it voices. She thought it was her. She thought it was all her shame. And she did have a lot of her own shame. She had been an orphaned kid, and her mother died when she was 9. Her dad was brain damaged. She was in a psych ward. And so her family was everything. So to leave her children, there were 4 of us, well, 3 of us home at the time, for her to leave that was devastating. It destroyed her. And she ended up getting murdered later when I was about 27 or 28. She ended up with a boyfriend who killed her. And so my dad was a narcissist. Everything was about him. You know, he was a superstar, Mark. He was a cover model on Life magazine, and he was a Viceroy cigarette man and the Remington shotgun shell man. And then he was a Navy pilot, and he trained the Blue Angels. And so he was a superstar in every world that he was in. And it was all about him. And my job as a child was to be quiet, not express anything negative, and not express anything positive too much. You could be happy, but only to a certain level. Like he'd say, well, the fun has to end. And so that was like, stop being happy. Stop being happy. We had a boat when I was a kid. We'd go from Long Island over to Cape Cod with other families. We all had, we had a small yacht that my dad rebuilt. And we'd come home after 10 days being out on the water and going to Cape Cod. And we had a blast with 4 of his kids. He let us take our friends. We just had so much fun. But when we got to the dock, he'd say, all good things must end. And we were told to zip it. We were not to express any more happiness. And so I grew up not being able to really express happiness or sadness, either good or bad. And so those entities, I think over the years, they worked on me and worked on my self-image till they got me to a place where they felt they could take over and then they could destroy me. And that's what they were attempting to do. And I thought that since my mother had gone nuts, that I had to go nuts. So that was my explanation for what had happened to me. My mother broke, therefore I broke. And there was no other option for me. It was just genetic. It had to happen.
Judy, when you first started hearing them, what did you think they were?
I was so confused, Jerry, because they were coming at me from 4 angles, because there were 4 of them. And like you were saying earlier about schizophrenics being confused, I was so confused I didn't know. But once they put me on psychotropic drugs, the voices were not so prevalent, but the thoughts magnified. They became more my thoughts. And the other thing that happened to me, and I've told Jerry about this before, Mark, they affected my hearing. So if I went to the student union and sat down where it was very busy and to talk to my friends, we'd all meet there in between classes. Sometimes the voices were so loud I couldn't hear the people around me. They completely disrupted my ability to hear. And they've done studies now on schizophrenics, and they look at the auditory part of the brain. It's on fire. Well,
Yeah.
I know it's on fire because those voices are lighting it up. It's you're constantly hearing. There's no rest. And Jerry, when you were talking about them sucking the energy, a part of the way they suck the energy out of you is that there is no rest ever, not a second. And when you have no rest day or night, it drains you. When they come on hard, the just trying to stand up in the middle of the attack and survive the attack without thinking that you're going to go crazier than you are, because you already know you're crazy, but you think, I'm going to go crazier. That's going to take me to a new level of crazy. So I was always fighting to hold my ground, whatever ground I had. I didn't have much, and it was exhausting.
Yeah.
So they would suck the life out of me, and then my own trying to cope would suck the life out of me. And so it was, and between not being able to hear people and then living in this other realm that nobody knew where you were. And to me, it became a prison. And so I painted black bars on my windows. I painted black bars on my door. And my roommate said, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm making my prison visual so I can see it, so you can see it, so you can see what a prison I'm in. And you do things like that when you're schizophrenic and then people look at you like you're nuts, but you're doing a real thing, for survival. I was expressing my prisonhood, hoping somebody would come, somebody would understand, somebody would save me.
Sorry.
Oh,
Do you
we
know that
lost
we disappeared there for 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, the whole internet disappeared for 2 minutes. I had to go in the other room and said, "Someone turn the internet off." They went, "No, it's fine. Just here."
well,
Oh, interesting.
there we go again.
This happens every time we speak. Sorry,
Every
Judy.
time.
Oh, that's okay. What should I go back to? Where were we?
Well, yeah, I got distracted by the internet being down, so can't remember exactly where we
Well,
were
let me
at.
say, I think I asked you, what did you think they were?
Oh, yeah, I didn't know what they were. And I'll tell you something. I wasn't about to tell my friends that I heard voices.
No.
I wasn't even going there. It was enough to tell them that I wasn't here. And they didn't know what that meant. I knew I was in another whole realm, but they didn't know what I meant by that. That was crazy enough for them, And then the voices, they'd tell me to kill myself. They tell me there was no life for me. The other thing that they told me was I was going to be punished. I never knew what for, but I lived in this dreaded fear of the punishment that was coming for me. And I think that's the paranoia element. Who is going to come and get me and punish me? Who's going to do that? The phone rings, you jump, you're startled because maybe this is it. Maybe this is the phone call they're going to come get me. And I was convinced somebody was going to come get me and take me and do what with me, I don't know. But I was just totally fearful of that. And
So if
and
you
then
look at
there was a feeling, the constant feeling of feeling crazy, because you cannot control your own thoughts. So the thoughts are coming at you. You can't control them. And so I think that loss of energy, that fatigue, is fighting all day, trying to get rid of these thoughts. And there's no way to get rid of them. But you spend your time trying to bury them, I played a game with myself called Radio. I made this game up, and I never told you about this, Jerry, but I remember this the other day. I played this game called Radio, where I'd think, well, I'll change the channel. I'm going to change the channel in my mind to another channel. And I would keep trying to change the channel, but they were on every channel.
Mm.
They were on every channel that I changed to.
and,
So
and when they spoke to you, Judy, they spoke to you in complete thoughts, right? It wasn't word salad.
Oh, no, it was very intelligent.
See, that's another kind of deception. that psychiatry and big pharma and the universities are perpetrating on the Western world again. When they talk about auditory hallucinations, I mean, even after I graduated from graduate school, I thought hallucinations, so they're like word salad. They're just crazy words that make no sense. No, I found out like you did. They're speaking complete sentences with complete thoughts, and they're devious, they're plotting, they're malicious. They're not just random word salad like auditory hallucinations might lead you to believe. These things have an intelligence to them. Some of them are stupid, some of them are very sly.
That leads me to a question, if I may, Judy.
Yeah.
I've got two questions, actually. Firstly, at the beginning, Jerry said that the voices sound like they're your own in most cases of schizophrenia, but you've identified that there were 4 voices.
Mm-hmm.
How could you tell that there were 4 if they sounded like your voice? Would they
They came from different places,
different directions?
different directions. Here, 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 here. I had 2 in front of me, 2 behind me.
And you
And
said
it's
you named one of them a girl's name.
Nancy.
Did they sound like your voice? Did they sound like women, girls?
That one sounded like a woman. I don't remember what the other one sounded like. I just remembered the name Nancy. I named the other ones, but I don't know. I don't remember what I named them because this was over 50 years ago.
Yeah.
It's
Well-
been a long time. And trust me, I spent a long time trying to forget this till I met Jerry.
Oh,
And then
well, Jerry's drag. Thanks, Jerry.
So I had to remember this. And every time I see Jerry, I've remembered more because
Well, pieces come back, right?
Yeah, I've allowed it to bubble up because it doesn't affect me anymore. I don't have any negative feelings about it. It doesn't scare me. It has no power over me. So I can remember, and there's nothing negative about that.
Well, that leads me to the next question, because I'm wondering if when you came into this life in your childhood, did you ever feel like you had a mission, that you were special, that you were different, that you were a black sheep, or anything like that? And the reason I'm asking that question is because I believe that there's a hierarchy and an intelligence to the demonic entities, and they literally have a structure
Yes.
to their society.
Mm-hmm.
And the lower level ones are the ones that create the guilt and shame that your mother was suffering. And the bigger prizes, people like potentially you here, which is what I'm getting to. The lower level ones are creating the circumstances to be able to get to that person, because there's a kind of like commission payment made up the chain within the demonic structure. And you would have been a significant, I'm guessing you would have been a significant prize for them to gain a hold of. Did you ever get that kind of feeling? Does that ring a bell for any of your experiences?
Well, my mom used to say to me that I was different. I was different than the other kids. I was brighter than the other kids.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew I was capable of so much more than they were. But as a child, I was a loner. I preferred company of myself. I would sit and we had a big picture window in my house, and I would, I was like 3 years old. I kind of stand, I guess, next to the window and stare into space and just space out and just disappear into my own world.
Yeah.
I did a lot of that. I would go out in the yard when I was 3 or 4 years old and pray to the angels. I don't even know how I knew angels. Well, I went to Sunday school, so I guess I knew. And I'd pray for the angels to come help me. Why was I asking for help at 3, 4 years old? I think about this now. Why was I asking for help?
Because you came from there.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting point as well. And I may be wrong here, but Jerry said that they're attracted to low frequencies, and I agree with that. But I also think they're attracted to very high frequencies, and it's a higher prize, and they know who you are before you come in. And I was just wondering if you'd ever heard that kind of idea before, or whether that rings any bells for you. And the fact that you were, I mean, my personal experience, my first memory is demons trying to recruit me in my bedroom.
Mm.
They would talk to me. I would see the shadows on the wall. I'd have a shadow this side of the candle and another one the other side that was a perfect black outline with horns on its head. And this is when I was 3 or 4 years old, and they tried to all night long they'd be saying, you got to come and work for us. You got to be on our side. We're going to give you everything you want. And I'll be going, no, go away. I was like a little baby, really. But I was praying to the angels and God, and I didn't know anything about them either.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah. I think that I look at my life now and where I am now talking to you, and I always wondered when I would be allowed to tell my story. And I always knew that one day I would.
Mm-hmm.
A year ago, I wouldn't have. I would not have done it. 10 years ago, I wouldn't have. There was too much talking about it, brought too much darkness on me, but I was able to break through that. During COVID, I broke a lot of dark stuff off. And so, now I can talk about it. As a kid, and I think maybe the reason that I didn't get attacked like you did as a kid, I was born with this incredible sense of truth. What was true? I could smell truth like nobody's business.
Mm-hmm.
I could, all my life have been like that. I can walk in a room and I can tell you who the liars in that room are. I can look at them and I know. Are we losing the internet again?
I don't know. Jerry's just disappeared, but carry on.
Oh,
Sure.
so it would have been harder for them to come after me than you, because I knew truth and I would have sensed that wasn't good. I'm sure you sensed it wasn't good either, but they did enough damage to me in my childhood, though, with my family, that I don't know that there was any reason to come after me like that.
That's really it's interesting with that. But what I like about what you said is that you found a way through it. And that's the thing that I think, did it cause a lot of trauma for people around you? How long were you in the situation where the voices were there? How did you get through that?
I was in that from 1971 to 1974. So 4 years of hell. And when your girlfriend told you she's in hell, trust me, it's hell.
Mm-hmm.
There is in that world, and schizophrenics, if they're listening, will know there is no love in that dimension. There is no peace in that dimension. There is no fellowship with anybody in that dimension. There is no life. There's only death in that dimension. And it is hell. It is an empty, void place with hell bearing down on you every minute of the day and telling you what to do. And they would tell me crazy things to do. They once told me to kill one of my friends.
Mm-hmm.
It was a guy that had gotten me involved in drugs, and we were sitting in a dorm lounge, and there was a big lamp there with a big, thick metal base. And they told me, pick up that lamp and beat him over the head until his brains are losing out, because he ruined you. He did this to you. He's the one that did this to you. Get rid of him. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. I still had enough of myself left. And Jerry and I have talked about this. They hadn't gotten that part of me that they could take me that far to do those kind of things. They could torment me, but they could not get me to kill.
So they never got you to do anything criminal?
No, I was more of a criminal as a teenager than I was when I had the entities. I did more bad stuff as a teenager than I did.
But a teenager, you're forgiven.
Oh yeah, I know. I get to forget that part of it. So,
Judy, how much contact did you have with psychiatry throughout this whole thing?
I saw the psychiatrist probably every 2 weeks, Jerry.
Do you think he had any idea whatsoever of what you were going through?
No, he was a really nice guy. He was from Scotland. I loved his accent. He had worked in the psychiatric hospital with schizophrenic women. He told me that I would be like this forever. The drugs would help tamp it down, that I needed to learn to live with it, that's a really interesting concept. How do you learn to live with torment 24 hours a day? There's no living with it. You're dying a little bit every day. And to me, it was like dying a little bit every day. And it was like, when will the end come? What's ultimately going to kill me? Because I knew that ultimately I was going to die. Either they were going to kill me or I was going to kill myself, because I couldn't live with it anymore. So I knew the end of it was death, but he didn't have a clue.
Yeah, so that's like another bone I have to pick with psychiatry. They don't believe there's a cure to this because they don't know what the cause is.
Well, because
So-
they've been taught that. They're just parroting what they've been taught,
Yep.
right?
They're parroting what they've been taught. It's like Dante's Gate. All who go through here give up all hope. Like there is no hope.
Yeah, well, that's what we're going through right now on a mass scale, isn't it? The same
Yep.
kind of thing. We're being given the choice constantly with the left hand and the right hand, and we're all having to choose, and it's having an immediate effect on what's going on, which is amazing. But on a micro level, Judy's story is really amazing. And you got to 4 years of that, and then how did you break out of that? Because that is quite a few years ago now. And do you remember?
Oh yeah, that was very dramatic. I flunked out of college. I tried to commit suicide again. I tried to gas myself in my car because I had nowhere to go. I had no money. My father disowned me because he told me to just quit it. Just cut this stuff out that you're doing and act normal because we can't take it anymore. And don't come home until you do. So he got rid of me. I had no money in the bank. I had nowhere to go. So I tried to gas myself in the car. And a friend found me and saved me. And I went to my psychiatrist. And I just told him, look, I'm going to kill myself. So help me. I wanted to move to Syracuse, New York. I was in Oswego. I wanted to go to Syracuse. I had a friend there. There was a house with a bunch of Christian women. I'd become a Christian during this time and had not found any help in Christianity at that point. But I had a sense there was something there for me. And I told him, help me. So he got me onto a rehab program so I could go to secretarial school for like 4 months. I could learn to type so I could get a job. And a friend of mine who had led me to Jesus knew some girls that had a house at Syracuse University, and they let me come room with them. So I moved. And I went to Syracuse, and I, of course, flunked out of secretarial college because I couldn't think or study. But I did get a job at a local daily newspaper there and was working there. And there was also a psychiatric hospital there, right near Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse. And I decided that I needed to find help. So I went one day to the psychiatric hospital, and it was done in units. It was a low-level, units. It wasn't a big building. And I just knocked on the door of one of the units, and I said, I need help, and this is what's going on. And the psychiatrist invited me in, and he said, tell me what's going on. And I told him, he said, well, I can't just do therapy with you, and I just can't let you walk in. And I don't remember how I could get in there. Maybe I have a psychiatrist, commit me or something. I don't know. But he said, you must have liked me or something. He said, but I'll tell you what. He said, I'll break the rules. You come 3 times a week, and I'll talk to you. And I was like, okay. So I went, and he talked to me the first week, and the second week he introduced me to this guy, Conrad. And he said, Conrad's going to be your therapist. And Conrad was this guy, he was just out of college. I didn't even think he had a master's in psychology. He said, I'm going to have you work with Conrad. Well, Conrad was a really good Catholic boy. And he decided that my major problem was my anger and my bitterness and my resentment and my sin. And he called it that. He said, your sin, you got to get rid of the sin in your life. And I'm like, well, I'm not angry. And then he said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll walk out the door. You decide whether you want to really go here with me or not. You decide if you want help. And he walked out the door, and I thought, well, I got nothing else going on. So he came in, I said, okay, let's deal with it. So he began to take me in a journey of talking about what I'd been through as a kid and the trauma. And I began to cry out all the stuff, my anger, my bitterness, the pain, the betrayal by my parents. I mean, I cried for months. And then I'd go to work. I went to work at 2:00. So I'd cry from like 11 to 12, and I'd take the bus and I'd go to work with red eyes. And that was probably the biggest groundwork for getting healed, was cleaning out all that garbage, cleaning out all that sin. I didn't understand at the time what that meant and how valuable that was. But when I began to do that, the voices began, or the thoughts began to get less and less powerful. And I began to develop a sense that I was somebody. I began to feel a little bit of myself again, because when you're in that alternate realm, that other dimension, you don't even feel like yourself. You can't feel yourself. When you wake up some morning and you're like, oh, this is going to be a great day. I feel so good. There are none of those days in that hell. You don't ever wake up feeling like yourself. You don't know who you are. So I worked with him for 4 months, and I was feeling a whole lot better. And then I was going to this charismatic Methodist church, up at Syracuse University. And one day there was this preacher from Philadelphia, Reverend Evelyn Carter. And I didn't know at the time that she was very well known. She was big. She'd go on CBN and all these networks. And she was a big name, kind of in deliverance, but not in a deliverance casting out demon kind of way, but in a much more a broader sense. And so she spoke. I don't remember what she said, Mark, but I was listening to her and I thought, this is my key. She knows. So I went home from church and I called one of the elders and I said, I've got to talk to her. And I knew the elders pretty well. And they said, okay, come on over. So I went over and I started talking to her and she said, well, tell me what's going on. So I started telling her and she listened for about 2 minutes. Then she just went, stop. She said, I know what your problem is. She said, those are demons. They're demons. And she said, you're a Christian. You belong to Christ. They have no power over you. Jesus overcame all that when he died on the cross for you. So you could overcome. And she said, but the only way you're going to overcome is with the word of God. And she gave me this little book, this Jesus Pocket Promise book. And she said, so every time they come at you and overwhelm you, take out the book and read scripture to them and tell them, you have no ground in my life. You have no power over me. Go away now, in the name of Jesus. I said, and I looked at her, Mark, like,
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Here's my magic wand. Here it is. But the weird thing was I'd had a moment before I met her where I was walking to the bus stop one night from work and I was walking down the street singing, Oh, Happy Day. Remember that song, Oh, Happy Day?
Mm-hmm.
And I had about 1 minute of being schizophrenia free. It cleared for 1 minute and I realized who I was and I realized I could be well. And I think that was God preparing me to be well, to be free. And then I met her. So I'd go to work and I'd be sitting at my desk and I'd have these overwhelming attacks of this crap. So I'd grab my little pocket promise book and the first day I ran to the ladies' room, locked myself in a stall, make sure there was nobody there, took out the book and I started reading scripture out loud. And then I said, in the name of Jesus, be gone. You don't have any power over me. I belong to Jesus. You can't touch me. And Mark, like that, it left.
Boom.
Boom, it was gone. I mean, all of it left. All of it lifted. The oppression, the voices, the whole mental thing, the dimension I was in, it was gone. It was absolutely gone. Well, I fought that battle for probably 2, 3, maybe 4 months. It's hard to remember. Where I'd have to do this like 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 times a day. And I just kept doing it because once I learned they'd leave, I thought, okay, now I know what the game is and I'll play. I was ready to play that game because I was ready to win. And so I did that for a while and then they got less and they got less and the attacks got less and the attacks got less. And then finally I was talking to my counselor and he said, well, you're doing so well and now you need to get off the drugs. And I was terrified. I was like, because I thought, well, what if I get off the drugs and it all comes back? That terror came at me. It's like, I don't know if I could do it. And I thought, well, you know what? I've come this far. I'm going to do it. So I got off the drugs. I went through a 2-3 day withdrawal with sweats and shakes and anxiety and whatever. And then I woke up in 1974. It was Easter morning. I woke up and it was all gone. On Resurrection Day, it was like I got my life back on Easter morning. I was resurrected. And so I was free, but then because spiritual warfare, the battle goes on. Mm. They never attacked me like that again, but normal stuff, normal spiritual warfare stuff happened like it does in every Christian's life. And I fought that. I've had 2 great battles since I was healed by the Lord. One was when my husband and I were having bad times and he moved out for a while and I was sitting in a chair and they came to me and said, kill yourself. You have no reason to live anymore. And I was so down about my husband being gone and my marriage imploding, which later was healed, but I didn't know it was going to be healed. I thought it was over. And I was so despondent that I thought about it for 4 hours. I sat in a chair and entertained the thought for 4 hours. And then I said, no. I'm not going to do that. Do you mind if I stand up and shut this blind?
No, please do.
It's blinding me. It's probably blinding you.
Yeah, I just think you would. I thought you were being lit up like an angel then, but it was.
Oh
just
yeah, that's my halo. So that that time they came back and they tempted me, and it was a temptation. Kill yourself. You don't want to live through this.
Isn't that a funny word to use about being told to kill yourself?
Yeah.
Like it's a temptation. Who would be tempted to do that? It's
Right.
it's heartbreaking. I mean, they did that to me, and I didn't get the same thing as you, but I got saved as well. But it was like I had to be taken right to the edge.
Now,
Mhm.
keep in mind, 50,000 people in the U.S. kill themselves every year.
Yeah,
And they're on these drugs. They're on antipsychotics, antidepressant. Where do those thoughts come from?
yeah, exactly. No rational human
No.
being would have those. Hey, if it was 50 years ago that happened, Judy, how did you end up speaking to Jerry about this so many years later?
Well, I wrote a book about it. It was
Oh.
published by Doubleday in 1978, but I had a very different understanding at that time of all what had happened. I've grown. I've learned about spiritual warfare. I'm actually in a ministry now with people in spiritual warfare. I wouldn't call it deliverance, but it's helping people get out of darkness. And I forgot the question, Mark.
Well, I was saying it's 50, 74 is 50 years, 51 years ago.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you got to the point where you were talking to Jerry about this, if it was so long ago since you'd actually got away from the voices.
Oh, my daughter came upon Jerry, and my daughter thinks I'm very cool because I work with a lot of people and help a lot of people. So she's always looking for ways to make my life more exciting. So she found Jerry, and she said, "Mom, this is your lane. This is where you belong." And she sent stuff on Jerry, and I bought Jerry's book, and I read Jerry's book, and I read more, and I thought, well, maybe I should email Jerry. And so I thought, oh, he's not going to want to talk to me. He's a big psychologist. He's not going to talk to me, or he's not going to believe me or whatever. And then I thought, oh, what the heck? I'll just write and say, hey, I can tell you a story. And I contacted him. But it was after going through COVID where I overcame a lot of the darkness of my past, because I went through a very difficult spiritual battle during COVID. I became disabled and very sick, and I nearly died about a year and a half ago. And yeah, it was pretty bad. I could barely walk. I couldn't hold my body up without falling on the ground. I was so weak. And I spent probably 14 hours a day in a chair praying, reading scripture, talking to the Lord, and tearing this stuff down in the name of Jesus. Every thought that came that was negative, I'd tear it down in the name of Jesus, replace it with something good. And I spent 4 years doing that. And when I got done, it was like, I could talk about this. It's like nothing anymore. And so Jerry emailed me back and said he'd talk to me. So we talked, and I thought, well, I wonder if he'll believe me. I was really worried about that. I wonder if he'll believe me, because I thought, well, he's got to be hearing from a lot of people. There's got to be a story he hears. And so yeah, that's how I met Jerry. So then he started taking me on podcasts with him. But I always hoped that I would be able to share this story and tell people that there is an answer. And one of the things I was talking about earlier is a lot of people think it's just a method. It's a method, but it's not a method. It's a lifestyle. Christianity is a lifestyle. It's a relationship with Christ. You can't just run out and say, in the name of Jesus Christ, be gone.
No,
and expect
it has to come right from the core of you. This is the way I learned, because they were coming at me during COVID. I had one on my back that was so heavy I had to crawl up the stairs. They were just coming at me relentlessly, especially when I started my podcast in 2020. And then one night I just stood up and went, and I just screamed at them.
Mm-hmm.
I swore at them, Judy, because I'm English, I swear a little bit. But I meant it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so powerful that they backed right off. And it's been an amazing journey since, because that's why I try to talk about this as well, because it always boils down to the same kind of thing. And it's just getting, so what I found that I wanted to share with you is that I started talking about my own demonic experiences 4 years ago during COVID, and after that podcast, I got off and I walked around the kitchen going, "Oh my God, I'm ruined," because
Mhm.
I've just talked about this crazy shit on a podcast and for hundreds of thousands of people. And what amazed me was I got thousands, many hundreds, maybe thousands of emails from people all around the world who said the same thing had happened to them and they'd never told anybody.
Mhm.
And that's the reason why I think this is so important, because this will reach somebody who's been through this to some degree and realize it's not their fault, it's not them, and that will help heal people, which is why I think this is so important.
Mhm. Well, and you were talking earlier, about being attacked as a kid. Here's one thing I know about the spiritual realm. I've had contact with a guy who had been a high satanic priest and is now a believer and teaches spiritual warfare. And he told me that they hold councils. And in those councils, they name people and they put people on lists
Yeah,
to destroy.
yeah.
And I know my name was put on a list.
That's why I was asking you that earlier.
And the reason I know this is that, and this pertains to another story, my husband and I bought a house that was haunted. And we had a dark black creature with big wings. My 3-year-old daughter described him because she saw him with big black wings, she said, who haunted this house and tormented us for 2 years. We were young Christians. We didn't know how to fight then. And one day this creature met my daughter in the hallway, and he said to her, I asked her, well, she came and told me that she'd seen this big black man with wings in the hallway. And I said, what? And she was like 3 years old. And I said, and she'd never seen a horror movie, so I knew she didn't make it up. And I said, well, what did he say to you? And she said, just as if she didn't, because she didn't understand what it meant. She said, he told me he's going to cut you up into 1,000 pieces and stuff you under the bed. And he asked me if I wanted to watch.
Whoa.
And we fought that battle in that house. And I called a friend of mine whose son was an ex-Satanist. And I said, because my house would fill with the smell of sulfur, like somebody had lit like 10,000 matches. And, it was horrible. The house moved, like there was earthquakes. There were horrible things happened in that house. There was a child's gravestone buried upside down on the property. There were amulets that were hung constantly on my outdoor lights. We were being cursed. We were on a council's list. And we overcame that. I called my friend and I said, what is this with the sulfur and this? She said, you've got a foul spirit. They come to kill, Judy. And she says, so I'm going to tell you how to get rid of it. And then also my daughter had 9 imaginary friends. They were all demons that talked to her. And she would relay messages, what they told her. Like, 2 years old, I don't have to listen to you. And I'd say, well, why do you, she was cute. She was 2. I'm like, well, why do you think you don't have to listen to me? She says, well, Poto's told me I don't have to listen to you. And Dito's told me I don't have to listen to you either. And she was perfectly serious. She wasn't trying to be rebellious. And so we went in and laid hands on her and commanded these things to leave her. And the next day she woke up and she didn't even remember she'd had them. She'd had them for a year. And then we just, in the name of Jesus, cleaned out the house and commanded them all to go, and they left. We sold the house and moved a couple of years later. But we found out, it's in this neighborhood I live in now, we found out now they came back after we left. And everyone that's owned the house has had to deal with that big black creature because he thinks he owns the house.
Well, it kind of does.
Yeah. So I know that my husband and my family was put on a council. My daughter went through a thing recently where in 1 month's time, somebody shot an AK-47 through her business, and she had just moved and she hadn't moved, the bullet would have gone through her. A woman above her was shot in the middle of the night. She had a road rage accident. A guy came after her with a bat to try to kill her. And then she drove her car into a shootout, not knowing it was a shootout going on, and her car stalled and her battery died in the middle of it. And she called me up screaming in the middle of the night going, what's going on? What's going on? And I said, well, you've been given a front row seat. God's showing you. He's showing you. People died. Get your life straight. Because she wasn't walking with the Lord then. I said, get your life straight. She did. She cleaned it up real quick and got back walking with the Lord, and it all ended. So I've watched, the attacks come on my family. And so I've had to break, our name on this council. And I do it occasionally just in case they put it back on there again, because you don't know.
Why do you think they put your name on the council if it was so long after the voices left?
I have a really strong ministry with women, and I help women, Christian women, come out of darkness. I'm gifted in tearing down demonic things because I understand them, and I know I can say to them, go, and they'll go, and they do. And I've seen people go through tremendous deliverance, and so I'm effective. In my church community, if I speak, people listen.
So
And
you're an exorcist.
Well, I wouldn't go that far because I've never done an exorcism. I don't think of it that way because a lot of the deliverance ministries, they'll get rid of your demons. But the problem is they don't deal with your sin. They don't deal with your heart. They don't deal with your spirit. And so you walk away, and what scriptures say, you get rid of them. And if you don't, you clean it up, but you don't fill it with anything,
They come
they
back.
come back, and it's worse. So I know how to get rid of them and fill it up, but I also know how to help people recognize the temptations which they think are their own thoughts. Like being angry. People say, well, I get angry. And I said, it really starts as a temptation. The thought, that catch, you have a choice to make right there. And I teach people about that catch. You can choose to get angry, and then you go into that realm, or you can say, no, I'm not going to be angry, and then you don't go in that realm. So I have an effective ministry, and I'm going to be doing I'm starting mace training this week.
Good for
Oh,
you.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that website over Christmas thinking of doing the same thing.
Well,
I
I can put you in touch with the people that'll get you there.
I think it'll be an amazing addition
Oh
to
yeah,
what I do, especially
because
people with long-term.
it wipes out all that garbage.
Yeah.
All the stuff that they feed off of. Mace will get rid of it.
Yeah.
So it will greatly weaken the voices. It might not totally get rid of them, but it'll starve them.
Yeah.
That's a great thing to do. Starve them first. Yeah.
Well, and my the Lord told me back in 2009, he was giving me and my husband ministry, and our ministry was to bring people out of darkness, to show them how to get out of darkness, to help get them free, to show them the tools, teach them the tools. And my thought is, with the world that we're living in today, it's all around us, and it's prevalent in the church. There's so many people in the church who are in darkness and don't even know it.
Yeah.
And
well, COVID proved that.
Oh yeah.
COVID proved that. I was outside the church here in Ireland, which used to be a very staunchly Catholic country only 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guy going into the church with a mask on. And I said, are you going into the church with a mask on? And he said, yes. I said, did God get the immune system wrong then? And he went, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And the priests themselves were wearing the masks. And it's like, well, you've just, what? If God created you and you believe that, what are you doing wearing this stupid piece of cloth? Mm-hmm. It's been extraordinary in that respect, because the people that God has found during this time are not necessarily churchgoers at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been extraordinary as well. A lot of people who are speaking now about their connection to God got let down by the church in most cases, especially in this country, because it was rife with pedophilia for centuries. Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting.
So one of the greatest tricks that the devil has pulled on humanity is that he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was always afraid of when I was working with people in the ER, trying to tell them, what the voices were, was that they'd run to a psychiatrist and tell the psychiatrist, hey, he's telling me these voices are demons. So Judy, when you first...
Then they'd section you.
Yes. I had to be very careful. Matter of fact, I gave up my formal license when I started talking about this stuff because I knew they'd go after me. They'd ruin it. So I'm still in good standing since I'd have nothing to do with the system anymore. So Judy, when you were first told by, the preacher lady that what these voices were demons, how did you react to that?
Well, it was kind of a twofold reaction. One was, maybe this is my magic wand. So there was great hope. And the second one was, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And I was scared. I was scared because if it wasn't true, there probably was no way out. I'd been a Christian long enough to know, and I wasn't a very good Christian. I'd read the Bible, but these entities would tell me that Jesus was weak. He let him kill him. Why would I follow somebody who would let him kill him? And, what was I doing in this? And why was I going to church? And, so, I forgot the question.
Well, see, that's
Okay.
another persistent, consistent pattern. The
What?
voices hate preachers, they hate church, they hate the Bible, they hate any spiritual practice whatsoever.
Mhm.
Why would a hallucination hate church? Why would
Yeah.
they hate the Bible? Why would they hate preachers? Why,
That's way
What?
too logical, Jerry.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on and on. As you look at all these patterns that they run, it's clear that what those patterns are is the operational definition of a demon.
Well,
Well, the other thing you asked me about when I met that preacher, I knew the scripture well enough to know that Jesus had cast out demons. So I knew he had the authority. I knew he had the power. I didn't know that I had the power. The scripture says he's given us authority over all the power of the enemy. Nothing will hurt us. I'd never heard that up to that point. I knew Jesus had power. I didn't know he'd given me the authority. So I had hope that, okay, if he could do it then, maybe he could do it now. And if he could do it now, I'll serve him forever. He says jump, I'll say how high. I'll do whatever he says. And I learned, we are given the authority to overcome the enemy.
no weapons shall prosper against us.
Mhm.
I was, in terms of the audience watching this, there will be people here who may secretly be suffering with these negative, well, a lot of people, the majority of people are still suffering with these negative thoughts. From both of you, what would your advice to them? I know you're going to say the MACE method or go to church, but what would be the first step for somebody who was experiencing that kind of thing? Would it just be to actually, how can you separate yourself from the voices in a practical sense, is probably what I'm trying to ask.
I think the first thing they need to understand is that these voices are not who they are. They're coming from outside. And once again, they could go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com, go to articles, and then pick up the patterns that these voices run and see for themselves. And that goes for psychiatry too. Wake up. These are not hallucinations. Your medications are not going to drive them away. What they'll do is they'll dumb down the person. They'll weaken the symptoms, but they don't get rid of them. So they have to understand what they're dealing with. That's the first step.
Well, here's something I told my daughter. When my daughter was 15, she went through a very severe depression. And we did everything we could to help her, and nothing was helping her. And I prayed and prayed and prayed. And one day I got a thought. So I went to her room and I said, I want to ask you a question. And she said, what? And I said, what are you really dealing with here? And she says, well, depression and anger and frustration and despair. I said, okay. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if you're in the room and if somebody comes and knocks on your door, what do you do? She said, I let him in. I said, that's your first mistake. I said, when somebody comes and knocks on your door, you identify them and then you decide whether or not they're worthy to come into your life.
That's so funny.
And she said, wow, do you know that within 3 or 4 days, she was out of her major depression, back to school as if it had never happened, because she looked at it and decided, nope, I'm not going to. Because I said to her, you don't have to entertain everything that comes to you. We think we do. We've been raised to think it's all us. It's our thoughts. We have to entertain it. We have to battle with it. I spent years battling with my thoughts. No, you identify it and you decide whether you're going to let it in. If you're not going to let it in, you boot it out maybe you would swear. I wouldn't swear, but I would boot it out with some enthusiasm.
Great point.
And boundaries are one of the biggest lessons I've had in the last 4 years. I kept getting the same thing. You need boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And I've taught my children never to answer the door.
Mm-hmm.
because that's, they actually use this in a physical sense. That's why letterboxes and doorbells appeared on the doors instead of on the grounds of the house. In the States, you've got those post boxes on the street. That's because they're not entering your property. They're not entering. Whereas here they have letterboxes where they literally post them through the door, and they can prove that they're now. When you understand that demonic forces run the governments, this is and they control everything with fakery. That is a 3D representation of what's actually going on in a spiritual sense, and all of us have to have these boundaries, and that's a wonderful piece of advice to give to any child or anybody that's suffering from this. I'm out of time for this, but I've really enjoyed this chat with both of you. And Judy, if you ever want to get any of those ex-Satanists to come on and talk about the councils, I'd be very happy to talk to them in more depth about the way that they work, because I think I go on about Satanists a lot on a lot on my show, but people still don't quite believe that they're real, or how they operate, and witches and covens and all of that kind of stuff. I did a video this morning saying we're in a war that is being run by wizards and warlocks and witches, and people still think you're nuts when you say that kind of thing. So any more depth on that would be very welcome. But in the meantime, I want to thank you both very much for coming on today. And if there's jerrymarzinsky.com is where they can find you. Jerry, what about you, Judy? Where can they find you?
I have a website called Strategies for Overcomers, and I also have a book, and people can email me from there, and I'll answer people. If I can help somebody, I'd be willing to help them.
Well, that'd be great. If you could send me links to all of those by email, I'll get those under the video. And once again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Jerry, for setting this up. I've got to go, but God bless you both. And thanks, everybody, for watching. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.